The opinions expressed on the following audio program are solely those of the host and the guests. Burner Podcast is an independently produced, not-for-profit show and is not associated with the Burning Man organization or its subsidiaries. The views expressed are not representative of the entire Burning Man community and are presented here for entertainment purposes only. In short, calm the fuck down. It's just a podcast.
All right, it's episode number 67, and it is 335 days till the man burns as of this recording. Man, I don't remember if I've already shouted out this listener, but fuck it. A shout out to Megan from Washington, D.C. She's logged in over 35 hours of this show on her many drives around the country for work. I think that officially means that she knows more about what's going on in my life than my dad. So I've been speaking more lately about my feelings on Burning Man serving the same needs for me as a church might for a more religious person. This past burn was for me a lot about what I'm doing with my life and where Boring Man falls into it. I mistyped Boring Man into my little script thing here, and I decided to just go ahead and keep that. So I'm going to say that again. Anyway, in case there is any doubts about how important this community is to myself and the team that works on this show that you love so much, or at least that you tolerate, in case there are any doubts, I'd recommend you check out the past, 66 episodes that we've produced. I am beyond grateful for the privilege of having access to this amazing subculture. And what are the bloody chances that Burning Man itself is just far enough? You know, I live in Southern California. It's just far enough where I can attend without paying exorbitant costs and all kinds of travel madness. But it's still just far enough where I feel a toll from the travel and dedication it takes to prepare and to attend. It's like right there on the sweet spot. It seriously keeps feeling more and more like I'm in a computer simulation where the architect knew just how far they can get away with pushing me. The carrot on the stick is like just close enough. So, yes, I am fucking grateful in too many ways to count. That said, I do believe the importance of learning lessons and then getting out there and fucking implementing them. Meaning, like go to Burning Man and then go other places. I do have many friends whose entire social circles and daily activities consist of nothing but Burning Man. Add those people to the list of people I am goddamn grateful for, by the way. I'm grateful for all of you, for everything all of you do. We thank you for all the work that you do so that we can have that magical experience in the desert or in one of our regionals or in this very vibrant community that exists the other 350 days of the year. But it is still a choice. The spiritual conclusion that I've come to personally is that we receive messages from the beyond or whatever, or Tao, God, whatever you want to call it, which manifest themselves in these magical human experiences, these profound experiences. And then it becomes our turn to go out and implement said messages. My feeling on the matter is that Burning Man is where you take your spirit to the gym. And then you have to take that learning out into the default world and exercise it. Spread that spirit to the rest of the world. And I know it's not just me because civic responsibility is one of those principles of that thing in the desert. This was a contributing factor to why I wanted to get to know Burners Without Borders better and why I wanted to find a way to support their mission and camp with them this year. And again, don't get it twisted. If you're eating, drinking, and sleeping Burning Man all day, like that's fucking dope. I appreciate you. We appreciate what you do. I and the people I tend to be gravitated towards simply tend to move more towards the idea of learn the lesson and go fucking implement, rather than let's relearn the lesson for the 78th time. I mean, how many times can you do DMT? I'm sure many people would argue, yeah, you need to go deeper and have communications. I mean, at some point, though, go take that information out into the world, is my thought on it, at least. At what point does it turn into spiritual masturbation, is the thought that I have. Or falling into the comfort of your own safety bubble. You know, being in this very safe space where everybody's nice and supportive and cool, and even the ones that are dicks, like you understand the level of dickishness you can expect from them. But today's show is an interview with Brian Baker. He's the Episcopal priest whose sermon on Burning Man went wildly viral a couple of years back. And I just spent the last few minutes talking about the importance of learning the lesson and taking it out there. So this is totally anecdotal. I'm making a connection here, I swear. This is totally anecdotal, but burners can get pretty turned off at the idea of organized religion. In all of my previous interviews, like, God, I guess pretty much any of them that come to mind, only one comes to mind where I remember the guest still thinking fairly highly of his experiences with Christianity in his childhood. And that was Chad Deal, all the way back in episode number 22. Like, he still had fond memories of a pretty cool church. Most people I talk to in this community, and again, this is anecdotal, this is my experience, most people have a lot of childhood trauma from religion. And, you know, they're trying to find a more open place where they can be themselves. And that's how a lot of us end up at Burning Man. A lot of Brian and I's talk today does revolve around the importance of learning the lessons and then implementing them. So, trigger warning, there is a lot of talk about the similarities of the church and Burning Man on this show. And I got to tell you, the answer that Brian gives when I ask him how Burning Man contributed to how he runs his church in Sacramento gave me a grin I wasn't able to wipe off for a week. Brian is a social justice warrior, an activist, and a burner. I got to share camp with them a couple of years ago, back when I was with Perky Parts. By the way, the Perky Parts crew are fucking ragers. Check out episode number 41 to get a taste of that crew's culture, which is indicative. The fact that Brian was camping with them is indicative of how comfortable Brian is, like, pretty much anywhere. I think at some point Brian actually like freaking schooled me on my outdated thoughts on political expediency and the LGBTQ community serving in the military. As always, we rant a bit about the burn. We get into some of the things that he's passionate about and some of the places where he has made a stand inside and outside of the church. Then we get into his own life story and end back up in the Burning Man community. We will, of course, be talking about Burning Man and where kind of he stands and some of the adventures that he's had out there and the lessons that he learned and all the ways that he feels that his faith has become stronger as a result of discovering this community and taking the lessons from this community into his other community. We get into the importance of learning the lesson and getting out there and fucking implementing it. Anyway, I have a feeling this is going to be one of those episodes that's going to end with a lot of people messaging me and emailing me for corrections and comments. Like, I'm already prepared for it. I feel like this one's going to be incendiary. I can totally predict that that's going to come. Today's episode is entitled A Priest on the Playa. I almost named this episode Radical Ritual. I was like super close to it, but I don't know. It just felt like, fuck it. I hope this is the right name. I go by Mr. Arash, even though nobody calls me Mr. Welcome to Burner Podcast.
On the first part of the journey, I was looking at all the life. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was a fly with the bones and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and
yesterday, I think we probably slept like 11 hours, and then today when I woke up, I was still ready to sleep for another 3.
Yeah.
But back to the subject.
Yes.
Roughly what percentage of your congregation would you say left when they felt pressure during the Prop 8 fight?
I'm thinking in my congregation that was really pretty gay accepting, was maybe 10%. And it was, not only so I was very much an advocate, not only in California, but also in the Episcopal Church for marriage equality. So it wasn't just that, but we have a time in the service where people come forward in the middle of the service and give thanks for things. And it was the gay couples coming forward saying, we're grateful for our marriage. We just got married, that kind of thing. And it was the people who were uncomfortable. They were okay in theory with having gay people in the congregation, but they were uncomfortable with it, being. So it felt like they were, don't ask, don't tell. I won't I won't oppose it. Just I don't want to see it. Right. And it was that population that left.
What has your feeling on Don't Ask, Don't Tell been? Like, do you think that's, because I can tell you this, my full disclosure, I think at the time that was taken as the approach, we've forgotten, because we've sort of progressed forward at such a rapid speed in the past few years, what a big deal that was. And like what a step, for lack of a better description, forward that was. Because the fact that the discussion was even being had, I think, was a big deal. It was a political middle ground that I think during the Clinton administration they came to. And I don't know, my feeling on it is that we wouldn't be where we are in the conversation right now had that not been the step that was taken at that particular period. So I wonder, was the feeling like the people that were thinking now, don't ask, don't tell, did they consider themselves to be pretty progressive? Or had they just kind of like settled for this is the way that it's supposed to be? Well,
the part that my experience is different is in the military, don't ask, don't tell was not a gift to the gay population.
Yeah.
Because, in theory, it sort of sounds like a good thing, that we're just going to let gay people be.
Right.
But in reality, it required gay people to continue to be in the closet. It didn't change anything.
Right.
They were required to stay in the closet, and if anyone suspected that they were gay, they could still get kicked out.
Right.
So I agree that socially the concept of don't ask, don't tell might have moved the conversation forward, in a more global sense. In reality, for the veterans, it really was a brutal thing to live under. And I have close friends who were closeted their entire careers, and their partners, and they didn't get any of the benefits.
Yeah.
And they were always stationed away from their partners because they couldn't, ask to be stationed in the same place. And
did it keep things the same, or did it make them worse, do you think?
I don't know. Things stayed bad. I don't know if it got worse than before, but it really didn't help.
Yeah.
It was, it was nice language to cloak something that was still horrible.
Right. Because I wonder if also, like when Obama was running for office, his first term, his public stance on gay marriage was that he believed in civil unions, but not actual gay marriage. And those of us, for lack of a better description, in the know, were like, well, he's obviously saying what he needs to say in order to win the thing.
Right.
Do you think looking at it from that angle was hurting the conversation as well? Was that helping? Was that at all connected to the don't ask, don't tell approach?
You mean the political expediency of it?
Right.
Well, yeah. I think it was a political expedient thing that needed to be done at the time, but at the same time, it continued for way too long.
Right.
And it wasn't until, but we are where we are, and the last few years, it's been so watershedy in terms of same-sex marriage equality, and I was fortunate. So in the Episcopal Church, our only pope, our only governing thing is a democratically elected convention that meets every 3 years. So we can only change our rules every 3 years. And we were working on changing our church canons to allow same-sex marriage and to create new rites, new marriage liturgies. We were in that convention, that every 3-year convention was meeting at the exact same time the Supreme Court was meeting to decide about marriage in the U.S. And I had the honor of chairing the committee at our convention that was working with that. And we were working on it when the Supreme Court changed the law of the land. And it was just a really joy-filled, profound moment that, to reach that point of marriage equality after so much anguish. It was a hard struggle. And I remember when Prop 8 passed and being on the steps of the Capitol here, at a rally with all of my heartbroken gay and lesbian friends, who had this narrow window of marriage equality and then having it taken away. And just knowing in my heart that was going to galvanize things. And so that in terms of being alive at the right time and getting to see something spectacular happen, that was that for me. And now we're in this new era of, of batshit crazy, political life. It's a fascinating time. And to leave for Burning Man, like feeling like I'm leave, like this place is like burning. Rome is burning and we're going to go to Burning Man and party for a week. That just felt a little incongruous, but also felt like that's where I need to be. There's something about the ethos of Burning Man that's going to hold up the best of humanity, that we need to be there and drink from that well and then come back to the fight.
Right. I recently came to the realization, I think for a long time I didn't want to admit this to myself, and I think a lot of burners don't want to admit this to themselves, because when this comes up in conversation, it'll get heated. Burning Man is completely fulfilling the part of our human experience that religion normally fulfills.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people get really angry and frustrated about that when that comes up in conversation. One of the reasons being exactly the topic that we were just discussing about Prop 8. Because with Prop 8, for example, a lot of people to this day are like my mom, for example, to this day is still kind of confused about how exactly that law worked. But like passing Prop 8 was basically the equivalent of you walking on your side of the street and somebody else walking on their side of the street and you running across the street to punch them in the face. Like you could just do your own thing and they could do their own thing and everybody's fine.
Right.
But we needed to pass a law in order to take away human rights that the highest court had decided, oh yeah, no, they should have that. Like they clarified that those rights should be existing because they're human civil rights. So with where spirituality and religion falls into all this, and I think that Burning Man is definitely populated by a lot of people who have had very frustrating and debilitating experiences with religion in their upbringing, and Burning Man is where they found themselves among like-minded people. But it's community. There's radical ritual. There's all these. There is the spiritual element of it, but it is a place where you can explore your own spirituality. And the difference is, and I think the reason that they're running away from where you've seen westernized religion is that so much of the population is using religion to actually enforce laws. And like, this is my personal view of the world. This is my conversation with God. And instead of making it my own private conversation, I'm going to use it I'm going to run across the street and punch you in the face. And that's where the frustrating part of it comes in. And I wonder sort of what your stance is on how much of that conversation with God, your own personal conversation with God, is a part of what should be taken out into the world and enforced on other people. Does that make sense?
Well, the part, where my brain started firing when you were talking was that you pitched Burning Man as if it's as this place where people are there having spiritual experiences without the dogma, right? But there is dogma.
Sure, yeah.
And in terms of saying, because it's a community with particular norms and values that we want to reinforce in terms of, non-judgment and generosity and creativity. And so there is, I think it's a religious community with the religious boundaries. Mm-hmm. It's just boundaries that are pretty supple.
Right.
And like when non-judgment is a boundary that creates suppleness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But boundaries that are pretty supple, but still, there is there is sort of these norms that we reinforce. And even when we say "fuck your burn," we're supposed to do it ironically, right?
Mm-hmm. Because that's part of the language,
right?
It's like you get the joke if you get Burning Man,
right?
It's saying randomly to a new person on the street, right. They just think like, "Wow, these burners are mean."
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's what lit me up about Burning Man.
Yeah.
Was, I went initially because my daughter invited me, and I knew it would be interesting, but it wasn't until Thursday, the day Perky Parts was having a Thong Thursday party, and I met a guy at Naked Crepes who talked about that how much he doesn't judge, how much energy he doesn't expend at Burning Man in judging, and I realized that I was on my own spiritual retreat. It went from me being like a tourist to being a pilgrim and being on my own retreat at Burning Man and realizing that I was being transformed because it was so much. I've been working 25 years to create religious communities that have the values that are lived out at Burning Man. And to see that, so for me, it is like a religion. It's just like the religion I want to belong to. In terms of its norms and its values. And it's also artificial. We can't be that well behaved more than 8 days. Yeah. Right? But being that well behaved for 8 days changes, makes us this much, 1 inch better in the default world. Yeah. And for me, that's exactly the same as what church is. Everyone in church is hypocrites. Because we're claiming, right? We're putting on this mask of being better than, and putting on our best behaviors and loving each other and claiming to love each other. And having this retreat experience for an hour so that we can be transformed. We can be a millimeter better during the week and over time. And for me, that's what Burning Man is. I go there for 8 days to have this experience of the kingdom of heaven. So that I can go out in the regular world and be, this year, be 1 inch better.
Right. Well, it's, as with all things that we experience in reality, perhaps that's where the confusion comes in for a lot of people, because it's like going to the gym. You're going to spend a couple hours at the gym so you can be strong, right. But you're still a human being, which means that every second of the day you are deteriorating. You are moving closer and closer towards death.
Right.
But when you spend a couple hours in the gym, you're going to be stronger and you'll have a better experience slowly deteriorating. Right. You'll deteriorate a little bit slower. So you go and have this experience so that when you come back to default, you're going to experience it a little bit better.
Right. Exactly.
And it feels like that's where a lot of religious people around the world, or the parts about religious people that are frustrating to non-religious people in the world, they think like because I go into this building once a week, then I'm allowed to kind of get away with whatever the hell I want to get away with. And I think that's the thing that gets a lot of people to push away from it, and they'll end up at Burning Man and they'll say I'm not religious and but I'm like, yeah, but you're completely in the middle of a religious practice out here.
Right.
Yeah, it's that's so interesting. You said Thursday at Naked Crepes was where.
Yes, where I had this conversation.
Yeah. That was your first year was 2014?
This is 2 years ago, so 15.
15, okay. So I want to go back to the beginning of your story.
Yes.
So for 25 years, you've been in the church.
Yes.
How old were you when you realized that this is the path for your life? What was going on in your life when this revelation came to you?
So there were two things. One is, a bit of the backstory is my wife and I met and started dating when we were 15. And I went to West Point, but I went to West Point because that's where she wanted to go to school. So I followed her to West Point. I'd never been to church in my life. And she sang in the choir at West Point, and I earned points with my girlfriend if I went to church. So I started going to church to earn points with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. As with all stories,
this is a story of a girl.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
So I went to church for the sex.
And then that was your... Go ahead. That's fantastic.
But I wasn't...
That might be actually the under the description for the episode. I went to church because of the sex.
But it wasn't... there were reasons. I was trying hard to be an atheist. There were reasons that don't really matter, where I was really pissed off at God, and I didn't want to have anything to do with the religious part of it. And then... In
your personal life?
Yeah, in my personal life.
Okay.
And months later, I would go to church, and this message would wear on me, like sink in slowly. And then, like 6 months later, I had an experience in church where I was overwhelmed with God as love, as just this force and power of pure love that wasn't dependent at all, like didn't care that I was giving God the finger. And it wasn't like I had to change and then I felt the love. It was just, I just felt this unconditional, pure sense of being loved and beloved that got me hooked on Jesus.
Can you describe the experience?
Well, it was the night before Good Friday. What we call Maundy Thursday is the night of the Last Supper. And it was at the Cadet Chapel at West Point. And the cadets came in, and there were 12 of them dressed in clothing like the 12 disciples. And one of them was Jesus. And Jesus said, "Tonight, one of you is going to betray me." And then they froze, like Da Vinci painted them. Yeah. And then one at a time they came alive, and they talked about how in their own hearts there was some way that they were betraying Jesus. And then Chaplain Camp gave this sermon about the title of the sermon was, "Is it I? Am I betraying Jesus, betraying the good?" And I'd never really heard the story of the Last Supper and of the crucifixion and all of that stuff. And it was this sense of, I knew clearly I was giving God the finger. And there were things that were happening in my life where if I looked back, I could see the hand of God touching me and loving me. And the whole time I was saying, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
And at this moment, I realized that, one, I was betraying the good, and two, from God's perspective, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
And I just felt like none of that mattered. I didn't have to feel guilty about it. It was just, I love you just as you are, and I want to dance with you. Stop getting in the way. Yeah. And it was that I was transformed into this experience of feeling loved and wanting to be an agent of love in the world. And how can I bring more love that breaks through? I mean, sin's a problem, but it's a problem on our own side. We identify ourselves with our mistakes and our misdeeds, and we cover ourselves with shame, and how to break through that so that we can be a community of love. So that was this heart transformation. But it took me a few years to get on board with the church.
So you had this thing unlocked inside of you through navigating thought systems, which, because what you're describing, and I'm looking for that connection. I mean, I had it. I've told the story too many times on this podcast with my DMT trip, which I think we talked about.
Yes, I heard it.
And a lot of people have their first DMT trip or their big LSD trip, or something like that it just opens the door.
Right.
And with you, it was this moment of sitting in the church and navigating the logical thought process, the tree, the branches.
Right.
And you arrived at this place. And how old were you?
I was my second year at West Point, so I was 18.
Okay. Were you guys especially young? I thought West Point was a college.
It is. I started when I was 17, so I was probably 19 at that point. But I was just I started school early.
Right.
Yeah. So it was then, but it was then I got hooked on Jesus, and I was reading the Bible and going to church. But I was really wrestling with whether or not I could be a Christian, because I kept hearing things like on the radio about Christians that didn't ring true to my heart. And I'm like, if you're not a Christian, you're going to burn in hell, right? Stuff like that. So a big part of why I went to seminary was I had to find out if I was on the right path for me. Like, does this religion fit my heart?
Right.
And it was at seminary that I realized that the religion, and particularly the Episcopal branch of it, was far more open and supple than I ever imagined.
Why was Christianity the primary option rather than
because
religion?
It was in church that I had this conversion, and it was around Jesus.
Right.
So I can't get Jesus anywhere else.
Right.
So it was there, but it was I was going to go to seminary and find out if I could find this loving heart in Christianity, and if I couldn't, I was going to find a different religion.
And what was it about the Episcopal Church that stood out?
Well, I started with the Episcopal Church because at West Point, I got an appreciation for the ritual that the Roman Catholic Church has, but I had trouble with some of the dogma. Mm-hmm. And the Episcopal Church has all of the ritual, but we don't have this dogmatic layer on top of it. And, we're very involved in social justice issues. And it's like religion. It's the only thing we're dogmatic about is our ritual. We care a lot about ritual done well, but we don't tell you what it means or how it's supposed to impact you.
What is the value of ritual?
So for me, God is mystery with a capital M. Mm-hmm. And ritual allows us to approach this mystery or encounter this mystery or feel this mystery by doing these actions and involving our whole bodies in something that connects us with the holy and the divine in a mysterious way. Like we enter into this fog of mystery through ritual. And this was my third burn. Last year...
The one that just passed.
The one that just passed. And last year we did one communion service at the temple. This year we did 2 communion services and a burial at the temple. Oh, wow. And this year I really realized the value, because Burning Man is this massive spiritual experience, but it's very diffuse. It's just people having experiences in this very diffuse context. And for me, having a ritual deeply grounded in my tradition at the temple, when I was celebrating Holy Communion, there was something that focused. It was like something like sucked all of this diffuse spiritual energy into something that, for me, in my my context, had a deep, profound meaning that made it less sort of vague and diffuse. Right, and it's hard to explain. No, that's the thing about ritual.
Yeah. No, and I mean, the theme this year being radical ritual, right, and us having this conversation now is so fitting.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you see it in multiple parts of Burning Man culture. It's starting to happen. Like what you're describing, that moment almost feels like the whirl of the water in a sink coming to a focus.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's almost like so much of burner culture is all these different little communities that have come together and found each other, and we're at the edges of the toilet bowl. Right. And you're hitting the flush, and we're all coming together in that, and there's these focused moments, and those focused moments are, for example, the man burn.
Right.
Where I'm sure you heard about the death this year.
Yeah.
There's this moment where all this energy is focused in this one particular area, and then the man collapses and everybody starts to run around it, and this part of it is very ritualistic, and there's the fire dancing that's happening around it, there's the lamp lighters coming out and lighting it.
Right.
So it's happening little by little, more and more. I think what we're watching at Burning Man is the earlier chapters of a religion. Yes. Where in a couple of a few centuries we'll look back on and then there will be people who will be engaged in these rituals and not even know why they're doing it anymore. Right. Right now we're at that chapter where we're watching it happen.
Right.
So I want to go back to your story though. So you discovered the Episcopal Church.
Yes.
And what's your wife doing at this time?
So she's a chaplain in the Army. She's an Episcopal priest as well.
Okay.
And right now she is, she's taken a year assignment where she is serving special operations soldiers. So that's Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Army Rangers, etc.
She's doing that right now.
Right now.
No, I mean, what was she doing then when you had just started to get into the Episcopal Church?
Oh, well, we were both at West Point, and then we were both junior officers in the Army. So we were both signal officers stationed in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And we were involved in our local Episcopal Church, and we were doing our Army mission.
Right.
And then she stayed in the Army and got stationed at the Pentagon, which was right next to my seminary while I went to seminary.
Was that always your role in the Army, as chaplain?
No. We were signal officers.
Okay.
So we were communications officers.
Did you have guns?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we were regular soldiers.
Okay. So move forward through the next few years for us. What brought the next chapter in your life as you got more involved with the church and got into community building?
So we, after I graduated from West Point, or after I graduated from seminary, I was a priest in Hawaii for 3 years, and also chaplain to an elementary school. With zero experience teaching, I was teaching Christian spirituality to 4-year-olds through 6th graders.
Right.
And it was far harder than the Army.
Yeah. Let me ask something.
Yeah.
So when you're serving positions like this, is the flock, I guess they would be considered the flock, are they aware of sort of like what your background is? Like, do people say like, oh no, you know what, we want a Lutheran, I don't know, another denomination. We don't want the Episcopals, or you guys are a little too progressive? Or is that like just, oh, we've been assigned here, there's an across the board understanding of Christianity and Jesus, so you just get kind of assigned?
Well, I'm an Episcopal priest, so I can only work in Episcopal congregations or Episcopal schools.
Okay.
But because, we're a very diverse denomination, and we pride ourselves on not having litmus tests. So we have very conservative clergy, we have liberal clergy, we try and be open. So there is that dynamic, this dance when you're being interviewed by a congregation of, are you the right person? Will it fit here?
So like radical inclusion is kind of one of your things.
In the Episcopal Church, yeah.
Yeah. And that will involve extremely conservative thought process to maybe extremely liberal thought processes.
Right. And it's, my ideal church is the church that has Trump supporters and people on the other side, but it has become increasingly difficult to have that diversity right now, because I'm feeling compelled to take stances that make, Trump supporters less comfortable, maybe.
Right. Yeah, it is sad that the conversation is being squashed, because it feels like for so long that's what kept our culture moving forward, is that at the very least we were having a conversation. But it does become more and more difficult when it feels like to simply have the conversation means that you're inviting wolves into the henhouse. Yeah. So Hawaii, what eventually brings you to California?
So I went from Hawaii to Boise to Sun Valley, Idaho, and I was the priest for 8 years in Sun Valley, Idaho, and absolutely loved it. And I got to be the village vicar. And, I buried everyone, I married everyone, I got to be that sort of person that lived in the village and held that role. And it broke my heart when I realized that I had to leave. It was, I woke up one day, we had built a new church, we'd done a lot of things, and I woke up one day and thought, this year is feeling a lot like last year, and next year is going to feel like this year, and I'm out of new ideas.
Right.
And so part of it was that. The other part of it was we were in a community that was hard to live in, physically, with the snow and all of that. And
Boise specifically?
No, Sun Valley, Idaho.
Okay.
Ski, and it's a resort community. It's people are, there are a lot of wealthy people there. It was an expensive area to live. We had no frail people, because if you were frail, you would move somewhere else. We had no homeless people.
Right.
We had one homeless person, but it was this isolated, beautiful place. And there was a part of my priestly heart that needed to be where it was gritty. And there were people that were homeless, and we were wrestling with sort of those kinds of issues, more crime. So it was those two components, realizing that I needed to move, and I wanted to move someplace grittier, where I could really touch the brokenness and that part of the brokenness of the world.
Do you mentor a successor when a thought like this comes up?
No.
Okay. You head out and you don't know who's going to come take your place?
Yeah, usually the system is you head out and the church hires an interim priest for a year or 18 months while they go through the transition of figuring out who they are and who they want to hire.
Right. Okay. So you're feeling called to action.
Yes, feeling called to action. So I come to Sacramento and there's plenty of action.
Yeah.
And this
How did you choose Sacramento?
We have a computer dating service.
Yeah. Episcopal Tinder.
Yes, but not nearly as sophisticated as Tinder. No pictures. But not that I know what Tinder is.
Of course not.
And I was looking for places that were bigger and more complex. So I set, a certain threshold for the size of the congregation. And Sacramento was in terms of where they were in the process, Trinity Cathedral was, the deadline for applications were a week away. So I quickly put an application together, sent it off.
Right.
And the process lasted several months of getting to know each other.
Was your wife with you in Idaho?
Yeah. So we were together in Sun Valley.
Right. And then so you both moved to Sacramento.
Yes.
Once this thing gets approved.
Yes.
Did they review your resume and decide
absolutely.
You're ready for this?
Right. Yeah, an interview, and it's just like getting any big job. It's a long interview process, and
interesting.
It's a free market system, so they have lots of candidates, and they choose between the candidates for the jobs.
So you get out here. How does it work? Do you find a place to live first? Do you have a start date?
Right.
You figure out how big is the congregation here, or was it at that time?
Yeah, we have about 500 people on a weekend that come to worship here. 500 worshipers on a Sunday. Probably about 1,200 members in the congregation.
So like the 500 are like the kind of the regulars, the inner circle types.
Well, of the 500 that'll be here on a Sunday, 300 of them will be the regulars, and then the other 200 cycle in and out because they don't come every week.
Right.
Because
one Sunday might be a little hungover, and then okay.
Well, and also ways that people understand belonging have changed. And being an active member might be I go once every 2 months.
Right.
Whereas before it was I go every week.
Right. And what year was it when you came here?
2006.
Okay. So what year was the Prop 8 fight?
2009, I think.
Okay. So you're out here and you start to build. How was the flock's response to you, in your opinion, in comparison to your predecessor?
Well, we did some things. One of the first things I did was I did a lot of work with Tibetan Buddhists in Sun Valley, and was doing some teachings with Tibetan Buddhist monks. So among the Tibetan Buddhist world, they knew I was coming. And shortly after coming, I had 2 people ask if we would host Buddhist monks doing a sand mandala. So we hosted, and we did it in the cathedral, in the worship space, not in the parish hall. And we hosted it there, and we had 5,000 people from Sacramento come through Trinity Cathedral to see the sand mandala. So that was like the first moment, I think, of the congregation going, this is a little different. Yeah. And then shortly after that, we got, I can't remember if it was the Prop 8 fight or I think it was shortly after that we started hosting. The county cut all of its funding for winter homeless shelter. And we started hosting in our parish hall homeless people when it was rainy or cold in the winters. And we would have up to 150 people sleeping on the floor, and we would feed them dinner and feed them breakfast. And then homeless people started thinking they might be welcome here. And throughout the week, we would have homeless people on the property and coming to church. And we weren't really prepared for that. So it took a year for us to figure out how to really handle that. But that changed the complexion of the church. And then the Prop 8 fight, where we became very, very involved in fighting for marriage equality. Those, to me, were the three, and the homeless and the Prop 8 and the marriage equality were like the two big things that have shaped who we are as a congregation now.
Right. With the homeless, you were saying changing the, what was the word you used? The complexion.
Right.
Are you finding that, do the homeless attend services?
Some.
Okay. And then do you find, are you watching changes happening in their lives, perhaps?
Some. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the ones, we've had people that were homeless that become sort of part of the fabric of the congregation and get involved in, committees or leadership and that kind of thing. And
that's fascinating.
Yeah, there are some, but we don't, nothing we offer, we don't make participation in the Jesus-y parts, required in order to be fed here at our feeding programs or anything like that. Right. But we also want to, it's a delicate balance, because we want to make sure that people feel welcome, but we don't want to have people feel coerced.
Right.
To participate in the religious services that we offer.
Right. Yeah, and that's another one of those things that so many of the people who have turned away from their own religion and spirituality have been disgusted by, is like that thought of like, okay, well, you're going to help me out if I accept Jesus into my heart. It's a little bit of that trade-off that exists with certain other denominations. So a marriage equality fight.
Yes.
That comes to the fight comes to your doorstep, basically.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what was happening in that time in your church? Did you, when you spoke about it, was there a backlash from that small percentage that you were describing? What was happening at that time here in your church?
Well, I learned, so let me back up.
Sure.
When I moved from Hawaii to Boise, it was 1994, and the religious right was just starting a new plan of ballot initiatives throughout the states. And in Idaho, it was already legal to fire someone for being gay or kick them out of their housing for being gay. But they wanted to pass a resolution, Proposition 1, that would make it illegal for people who were gay to seek civil rights protections. So it was just like pouring salt on the wound. And I preached in Boise this sort of very balanced sermon that it was here because the church had not decided at that point. We were in the middle of a conversation, and I said, here are the reasons against, here are the reasons for, and we need to have this conversation. And it was the first time that anything gay had been ever mentioned in the pulpit, and so I wanted to raise this up and say, we have to have this hard conversation. And then I tacked on the end of that, but regardless of how you feel, this ballot initiative is cruel.
Yeah.
And it was the first time in the history, and my knees are quaking, right, when I'm preaching this sermon, first time in the history of the cathedral in Boise where the congregation burst into applause after a sermon.
Wow.
And I was naive enough to think that was a good thing. And what I realized shortly after was half the congregation was applauding. Right?
You were hearing the positive half.
The other half, from that moment on, wanted to get me fired. And I lost my ability to influence because they wouldn't listen to me anymore. So when I left Boise and went to Sun Valley, I never spoke on a hot button issue. I spoke on the values that would help inform people make decisions on the hot button issues.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I preached about love and inclusion and the dignity of every human being and all of that stuff, but never went one level above and said, we need to feel this about that.
Right.
And it worked really well in Sun Valley. I had people, we hosted a gay thing someone said, would you show this slideshow on the history of gays in Idaho? And we hosted everything. So I said, yes. And I had this retired CEO of Dubai Ports International come up to me and say, Brian, I never would have gone to anything like this, but you've taught me to be open to things. So I'm going to go and hear what these people have to say.
That's beautiful.
Right. So it was so fast forward to here. I used the same strategy in a big sense. I didn't need to say things about marriage equality because my congregation was saying it. We had gay couples getting up and giving thanks for their relationships and that. So I would just preach on inclusive, on creating a container so that we can disagree in a safe space and creating values of love. And then other people were driving the conversation. That was my position from the pulpit. Right? Because the pulpit is a particular kind of speech where people are captive, right? It's not a dialogue. So I was extra careful in the pulpit, and then I would speak much more directly on the Capitol steps at a rally. So those were my two.
Because from the pulpit, it's almost, respecting that position. Right. It can almost, I'm just, as much as we agree on this subject matter, we also don't want to bully. Because that's the thing we're saying about debate. When you bully the other side, they're just going to shut down. Right. And it's the same thing, honestly, with good art. I'm pretty active in the hip hop community, and I can tell sort of who is an artist who's further along in their path when they're dissecting experiences and doing interesting wordplay and creating an interesting song versus somebody who's sort of newer, where immediately every song is about a very direct message. And it's kind of sort of kind of amateur hour. But that's something you learn is your job as the leader of your flock is to facilitate a comfortable and safe space rather than bully people into a corner. Right. But then when you get on the Capitol steps, how does that shift?
Well, because I'm an advocate for an issue. And there needs to be, and in particularly, I came up, in the 90s when the religious right was seen as the only Christian voice. And it was important for people on the religious left to stand up and say, you don't speak for all of Christianity. So that was my training, was needing to give a focused. And what's happening now is that the churches are now being seen as active in the way we were active in the civil rights movement in the 60s, is that now, we're being called upon to speak for the oppressed and expected to. And that was my role during the Prop 8 fight, was to say, and not say, I didn't have to say God demands this, right? But I'm a priest in a collar saying marriage equality is what we need to be about. And just to have that, so the religious right wasn't the only people speaking in that arena.
Right. So, all right, let's get to Burning Man. A few years after, your daughter goes to Burning Man first.
Well, she'd never been.
Oh, okay. She'd been to other festivals.
Yeah, she would go to music festivals, a lot of music festivals, and she started hanging out with the Perky Parts people at music festivals. Right.
It's, by the way, it's extra amusing because I've interviewed the Perky Parts founders, Trav and Matt Goss and Felicia. That episode of this show is the one that I had to handle with most care after release because it was just, immediate, drunken train wreckness. And it's really funny that the connection that's connecting to that is this other, we're here now in your office at the Trinity Cathedral. So your daughter, how old was she when she started attending the festivals?
I don't know when she started attending festivals, but at the time we went to Burning Man, she was 22.
Okay. So she's 22, and she knew the Perky Parts crew through Coachella, I think.
Yeah, or other festivals. I don't know. I don't really know.
Yeah. Okay. And she recommends that you should camp with Perky Parts. Yes. And her description was because they're a little bit older.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it was,
This is so great, by the way.
It was either Perky Parts or her 21-year-old Tahoe, pot friends.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good choice.
Yeah. Okay.
But to get to, I mean, this is a hard part. Perky Parts, it's a hard partying crowd.
Yes, they are. That's why it's extra hilarious. Like Perky Parts, number one, I would say, I've camped with much older camps. In Perky Parts, I think in the past couple of years that I've hung out with them, there's definitely a younger contingent, and then there's like sort of like the core base, which is around my age group, the mid 30s, early 30s. Right. But she sets you up with Perky Parts because she's gone with them, but she's camping with another crew in Tahoe. How does your first burn planning go? Like, what is the first thing you start doing in order to get ready for Burning Man?
Well, I mean,
by the way, what convinced you want to go? We should get that part.
Well,
first.
I've heard of it. I've had parishioners that went. There's a part of me that was always like intrigued, and I someday I'll go to Burning Man. That thing.
Yeah.
But it was the invitation from my 22-year-old daughter to go. It was her. She had never been. She came into the 2 tickets at the OMG sale.
Right.
And asked me, as sort of an offer I couldn't refuse, and we've had, as a family, we had a challenging life growing up together. And there was some, hard relationships and some estrangement and all of that. And for Laura to get 2 tickets and ask me, it was a significant bid on her part for our relationship. And to invite me into her world and to show me what's important to her.
Is she religious? Is she active in the church at all?
She's not Christian at all.
Okay. Was that a contributing factor to the challenges you guys have had?
No.
Just basic, teenage girl upbringing stuff? Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. In sort of basic teenage upbringing stuff on, heightened, to volume 11. But...
I mean, she's the daughter of a pretty badass couple, so I imagine she's outspoken in her opinion.
Yeah, she's very strong.
Yeah.
She would not accept, she was very strong as a child. Anyway, we can move on from that.
Sure.
But so to have her invite me, was an offer I couldn't refuse, and I'd always kind of thought I'd enjoy going. And then, the prep was, reading the regular camping prep and then finding out, what else you need to survive the dust and all of that. And then she came down one day.
And I'm sorry, real quick, your wife, is she in Afghanistan at this point?
No, she's at home at this point.
Okay, and she's like, all right, well, you go off to Burning Man and tell me about it when you get back.
Right.
Okay, all right, continue.
And she's much more, like, I'm the hippie in the couple.
Yeah.
And she's, G.I. Jane.
Yeah.
And, I'm the early adopter and she's not.
Yeah.
So...
Because I just remember when I met her at Perky Parts a couple of years ago at the Burn, she was like, yeah, it's like whatever out here. This isn't that scary. I've been to Afghanistan.
It was... I can't remember if she'd been to... Maybe it was right after Burning Man that she went to Afghanistan.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I remember her response being, this is not alien to me. This desert environment thing.
Maybe... I think she had been to Afghanistan, because I think when we were talking about it, she was like, I've seen the dust. I don't need to see it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I think she had been. Okay.
Continue.
So then Laura came down and took me thrift shopping so we could buy clothes, and there was that prep of it. But the other prep was trying to fit me into Perky Parts. And, they have a Facebook group, and, so Laura introduced me and tried to credential me. Yeah. I want to bring my bat dad, but don't worry, he's cool. And by the way, he's a priest, but don't worry, he's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you feeling the reactions are from your perspective?
Oh, they were on Facebook, they were very welcoming and, we trust you, Laura, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then the minute I got there, when I rolled up, Jesse came up to me and gave me a big hug and said, we're so glad you're here, and anything, you're free to get your freak on here, whatever it is, even if your freak is religious. And what he said was, if you want to preach a sermon, you just let us know and we'll come. It's just, I was so moved by the welcome, that I received by this group of hard partying people. It was really fun. And go ahead.
Tell me about your entry. When you came in, did you do the Dust Angels?
So I rode my motorcycle in.
How did you carry all your stuff in?
Well, Laura, so because it was a late invitation, because she got the tickets at the OMG sale, I had to do church on Sunday morning, both weekends. So I couldn't.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I had to preach on both weekends, and so I waited until Monday morning, and I also didn't know what I was like. I wasn't hankering, right? So I didn't leave right after church like I did every other time since. But I left. So Laura drove the car with all the stuff, and I went in with my motorcycle because you don't need a vehicle pass. Plus, it's badass to ride a motorcycle to Burning Man.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I rode my bike to Burning Man, and I can't remember what question we were on.
Just tell me about the entry.
Oh,
Did you do the Dust Angels?
Yeah. So of course I did the Dust Angels.
Yeah.
And rode up a big bike through Burning Man, and then rolled into camp. And Laura had everything set up. She had our monkey hut set up.
Oh wow, she set up your stage structure, all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just had to set up my pup tent.
But she wasn't even camping with you, so she set your stuff up and then went over to her camp.
Well, so we weren't sure at that point. So we were going to, and she set up the back of our car. She was going to sleep in the back of our car, and I was going to sleep in our pup tent, and it was all under the shade structure. Yeah. And then it wasn't right clear. Like, I thought she was going to camp with us, and I think she thought. And then once we got there, she just ended up spending most of her time with her other friends. Right. And it ended up being perfect because we didn't wake up every day going, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? And so we were completely on our own. And then we would have maybe 3 days together where we would connect up and spend the day together. And it was absolutely perfect.
All right. Tell me about your first night out on Playa.
Well, so I'm not the I spend all night staying up person, but
you're early riser?
No. I'm happy to stay up till 1 or 2. I'm just not going to stay up all night long.
1 or 2 is a legitimate amount of time to stay up.
But it was just magical. And it was me and Laura and I think Molly McFly and a couple of others, maybe Luna, went out, and just the night, the lights and the sound, and I think we headed toward the Man, and that was the circus themed one,
right?
And
the souk, was that the souk here? No, may have been. Anyway,
and anyway, it was just this magical overstimulation. All of the lights and all of the sound and all of the music, and I knew I was in for an adventure, and that was all confirmed when I walked out on the Playa at night and just saw everything in the art cars. And I mean, I imagine it's the same. Most people, it's just overwhelming beauty.
Yeah. What was the first thing that, not necessarily in that first night, but what was the first thing that really just surprised you about the experience that you had no frame of reference for until you saw with your own eyes?
I think two. One, I'm driven more by relationships. And for me, it was the welcome I got at Perky Parts, and being a part of these people whose lifestyle is completely different from mine, and being able to love each other so wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
That was, that's my prime experience. And then the other was the temple. And,
So had you already known about the fact that there is a temple there?
I think I probably knew there was a temple, but I didn't sort of grasp
what a major part of it was.
Right. And the power and the power of what people wrote on the temple and what people left on the temple.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that's a common experience that people have, is people sort of know that there's a temple, but so much emphasis is placed on the man itself from external imagery.
Right.
That once you get out there and you see what a potent experience it is, and how to so many people that attend Burning Man, the temple is not, if not equal, is even more important part of the experience of attending than the man burn.
Yeah. And I feel like, I think it's part of what fascinates me about Burning Man is so many people for so much of the time are on the party bus.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're yearning for and expecting a spiritually transformative experience.
Right.
And the temple is a big part of focus of that spiritual experience and transformation that they're expecting. And it's this, somehow those are not incongruous.
Yeah.
Right? Being on the party bus and yearning for this spiritual experience and being open and hungry for that are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I've sort of held space for a few virgins over time who, you get out there and like, you hear a lot from the veterans about your first breakdown when you're out there. And there's generally been this response of like, no, you need to have this. Like, you're going to it's going to be great. Don't judge it. Don't pass a negative judgment on it. I remember my first burn, I was talking to some friends because I've been active in the community for a year before I actually even attended my first Burning Man. And I was talking to a friend, Stephanie, who was a build lead on the journey this year. And I was saying to her, yeah, I imagine I'll have some sort of a breakdown by like Wednesday. And she laughed. She's like, oh, honey, Monday. Monday, you're going to have your breakdown. I remember come Monday, enough things lead to each other and the environment is just completely kicking her ass and just burst into all kinds of tears. I cried so much that week. And when I've had this conversation with other virgins who've attended, my stance on it has always been like the partying is the carrot on a stick that brought you out here.
Right.
Really, you're out here for growth. Some part of you knew that, whether you want to look at it spiritually and say, this was my energetic destination in life, and I've chosen to be here so that I can have this breakdown. Or you want to look at it from a psychological angle that you subconsciously chose this.
Right.
The real reason you're out here is that spiritual experience. The party bus just happens to be the car you rode in on.
Right.
And I think that's sort of the very powerful part of it. But once you get out there and you have it, then it's, oh, that's why I'm out here. That's why I put on this ridiculous outfit and I'm out here in the dust and getting my ass kicked.
Yeah.
How much time did you spend in the temple in your first year?
I probably went 3 or 4 times and, probably spent about a half hour to an hour each time. But I didn't experience the temple burn.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had to come back for church.
Oh, yeah.
And so I left Saturday morning. I had this experience, and I'm absent-minded. I'm like this. Part of my experience that first week is I was sleeping in a pup tent.
Right.
And multiple times, at least twice, I forgot to zip the pup tent.
Oh, yeah.
And would come back and there would be an inch of dust on everything. Yeah. And I would be exhausted and I would just lay down in this poof of dust and go to sleep. And we were at 2:15 in E the first year and 2 o'clock in D the second year, which meant we were living at the sound camp.
Yeah.
And I'm someone that's trying to sleep during the night.
Yeah.
So there was that environmental stuff that just made it. And it was fine. None of it was that, but just added this other texture. And then I ride on my bike and get home Saturday, covered in dust, and then get in the pulpit Sunday morning, and preach for, telling Burning Man stories.
I'm going to ask you the question that non-burners, like the burner curious, always ask burners, that to us is such a kind of a roll your eye question. Like, oh God, this is really the first question you want to ask, huh? After all this magnificent stuff that I've told you about the drugs. What was your observation and feeling about the drug use? What has it been historically? What was your observation about it out there?
So I have 2 things. One is I have very little exposure to drugs.
You don't consume alcohol?
Historically. I consume alcohol, but not a lot.
Okay.
I'll have a drink occasionally. If I have 2, I'll have a little hangover the next day.
Have you ever been drunk?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
But I'll consume alcohol socially, but not a lot. I don't do drugs. I'm not in an environment where I'm around people who do drugs. Right.
Have you smoked weed?
I tried it twice at West Point.
Okay. But you didn't inhale.
I inhaled, but I don't remember it having much of an effect.
Okay.
That was long ago.
That's common. Yeah.
So that, and I didn't, and I am not uncomfortable around other people doing things. So those are the 2 pieces of my temperament. I have very little exposure, but I don't care what you're doing. when I was at Perky Parts, I mean, and it was really cute. Like, someone, their gift was this little spoon.
Yeah.
Right? I have no idea what the spoon is used for. So they created some story. I can't even remember what the woman that gave it to me, what she said the spoon was for, but it was total bullshit.
Yeah.
So I wore the little spoon around my neck.
Yeah, a little ketamine spoon. That's great.
Yeah. And around me, and when they were everyone has always been, even if they didn't know who I was, right? I had two people ask, before giving me something, say, do you use cannabis or whatever. But at Perky Parts, the only thing I saw was whippets.
Yeah.
And they just made me sad.
Yeah. The whippets do?
Whippets.
Why is that?
Well, it just seemed like something that didn't... it just seemed like someone would do it and then they would just look sad.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a sad thing. I could see taking drugs that create, some kind of euphoria or something, but it just seemed like something that numbed something.
Yeah.
And so that part of it, my sort of own personal... Like, there's no judgment to it other than that just looks a little sad.
Yeah.
There's something that I don't...
I can tell you, for me, I feel like it's kind of like a cigarette break, but it just keeps going. is what is the funny thing about that. But what you're describing about the experience, that's interesting. Like, that's what I look at too. Is like there's certain substances that are. This is again my anecdotal opinion on all this.
Right.
There's like the human body stuff, which is just makes your body high, but it doesn't necessarily expand any experience. Then you have things like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, where you can use it to explore. It opens up certain parts of your consciousness so you can have conversations with yourself or with God in a manner that it lubricates those conversations, for lack of a better description. Right. I remember on the other show that I co-host, we interviewed Kayla Carrera, who's a porn star, and she was telling us about her heroin days. And when she was describing what you do on heroin, it just doesn't at all seem interesting. You basically do heroin and you lay around feeling good, and then you crash and you need more heroin.
Right.
Whereas with like LSD, for example, you may take it and go explore an art piece, and then that gives you a new idea about the way to do a new project in the real world after you come out of it. Steve Jobs is like attributed to LSD many of his greatest ideas with what he's done with Apple. So anyway, you're saying that you don't feel uncomfortable around it. You feel normal around it. Did you have any thoughts about how people who use substances feel? Like, this is kind of a weird question, but like, I wonder, one thing that I've enjoyed about the Burning Man community is that people might offer you something and you politely decline, and that's the end of it. Right. there isn't like you don't do this. Like, there isn't like a confusion or, judgment on their part. Right.
Yeah, and that's been my experience. The 3 burns that I've been at is that it's just this very lovely, open but non-judgmental. Right. And twice people came up to me and said, do you use cannabis? And I say no, and he goes, oh, okay, well, I had a gift, but that's
but it won't be of use to you.
Right. It won't be of use to you. It's like, thank you for the thought.
Yeah. Do you have thoughts on spiritual experiences that people have with substances?
I don't. Just because I have no frame of reference. Right. It's not been, the only time I've had any conversations around that are the few times that I've spoken with you, and that's pretty much it. And a couple of other people at Burning Man. So I don't have a frame of reference around to form an opinion.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to come back here and we could literally do an entire show just on that subject. I think that would be interesting. So you come back from Burning Man and you do the sermon on your trip, and that's the video that goes viral. Right. Which I can tell you, like, for a lot of people in my generation, it was really exciting to be able to show something like that to people who don't get Burning Man. Right. Like, look, here's a priest. Right, exactly. He has street cred with, you. Right. What was the reaction to that? What was your experience with that sermon? How did your flock take it?
Well, the congregation loved it. I mean, and this was a congregation that takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to send a priest to Burning Man.
Yeah.
And I had a grandmother send me a photograph of tutus on sale at Michael's, saying, if you haven't got your tutu yet, I've found, tutus. Or,
that's great.
and people made stuff for me. And so it was a thing for the congregation that their priest was going to Burning Man. And, so they were eager to hear. And self-consciously, my inner critic, once I realized that sermon was 36 minutes long, was horrified.
Why is that?
Well, because I try not to preach it. Over 20 minutes is interminably long. And to have a sermon that's 36 minutes long, but I didn't know it was. Plus, I was exhausted. I'd just gotten back. But the congregation loved hearing the stories, and I think most of them, there are a few people that might still, look sideways at their priest going to Burning Man, but most of the people get it and appreciate it. But it was...
There's literally generations of people that have attended Burning Man that to this day are keeping it a secret from their employers.
Oh, wow.
And you're in this position to speak about it so publicly and openly to a community that the general population would think is the last community that's interested in hearing about Burning Man.
Right.
Or at least, is not positive stories about Burning Man.
Right.
What they would be, a lot of people would like to hear like confirmation bias of like their negative ideas about it. But
well, the other itch, that the church has is like we know we have something special spiritually here. Like there is something here. There's this at Trinity Cathedral. We have this community of non-judgment and love and care and all of this stuff that we know we have, and we don't know how to communicate that and to share that with people outside the church. So the other itch I'm scratching is I'm taking what we know we have and connecting it with people that have no desire to be anywhere near us. And so that's the other part that I think some people are finding intriguing, is because there's something we have here that we want to share, and here's a way of sharing it.
Right.
That is completely non-judgmental, no strings attached. We just have this blessing we want to share.
Right.
So that's the other reason why people here, I think, are intrigued by it, is we're figuring, there's some way that that's happening.
It's like you have a meeting room of like your own team here.
Right.
And with this Burning Man conversation, what you've done is rented out another hall where other people feel more comfortable walking into, and now a conversation's being had with people that normally the conversation might not exist with.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Did your first burn influence anything in the way that you run the church here? And it's okay if it has.
No, I mean, it's a bigger question rather than it's too small of a question.
Wow.
Because it changed me, right? And being a part of a community that was not so non-judgmental and generous and open, there's a way in which it sort of raised my expectations. It sort of raised the water level, like we can all do this, people. So it sort of raised my expectation of who we can be.
Wow.
As a church. And I don't know if there was anything explicit this led to that, but it had more to do with who I was as the priest.
No specific logistical changes in the way the church operates.
Right.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So coming out of that, you knew you're going to go again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was not even a discussion.
Well, I found my people.
Right. What was the church's reaction to your sermon going viral about Burning Man? Was there any? And I don't mean the church here, but the hierarchy.
Yeah, I don't know that we're not a very centralized church, so there wasn't I think I happen to be now on the executive council of the Episcopal Church, which is like the board for the denomination. And because of that, they knew, they heard, people heard of it, and I think were intrigued by it. I think that was it. The extent of it was just intrigued.
Yeah. So But the Catholic Church is obviously more centralized, right? Like if a Catholic priest was talking about their trip to Burning Man, I imagine they'd have a reaction.
Right. Yeah.
Because they have like a central PR office, would have to approve everything.
Right.
Episcopal Church doesn't. On like, I don't know, let's say on a scale of centralization of a church.
Yes.
And you have the Catholic Church all the way to the right of the scale. And onto the left side of the scale, you have small flock in a very small town somewhere in the deep south where...
non-denominational.
Sure. The pastor just basically is, has a Bible and started talking.
Right.
Where on the scale does the Episcopal Church, do you think, fall?
I think kind of in the middle.
Okay.
And we have a structure, but it's very broad.
Right.
We have a convention where 800 people get together and make decisions, and we have a presiding bishop, but he's more like our Queen of England. He's this symbolic center, but he doesn't have any authority over any of the churches or anything.
So when like decisions are made at this convention,
yes,
can somebody just say, you know what, screw the decision, I'm just going to do my church differently?
But depending on depending on how extreme it is, there might be ramifications.
Right. They have to see how much it's pissing off the other people.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And pissing off their bishop, who has some authority in those matters.
And Burning Man doesn't piss Episcopal Church off enough.
No, and it's not. And in fact, the Living Church, which is one of our independent magazines about the Episcopal Church, did an article last year on Burning Man and included a lot of my pictures and interviewed me and a few other people. And it's not seen in a negative light in the church.
Yeah.
It's seen as an interesting, it raises the question of how do we cross this boundary between the church and this ethos and this sort of community at Burning Man.
Right. Okay. So the year goes by, you're going back.
Yes.
Tell me about preparation for the coming year. Were you, at this point, I imagine, like, there's stuff popping up throughout the year that's making you think, oh, I'm going to do this next year at Burning Man. Oh, I'm going to buy this outfit for next year at Burning Man.
Yeah, that and the fact that I was now, at that point, probably 20,000 people had seen the video.
Yeah.
And I was getting emails from burners all over the world. So, and the shorthand explanation of describing the sermon is, finally burners had something to show their mothers.
Yes. That's exactly what it was.
Right.
I mean, there's the sermon, and then for me, it's also the video, Charlie Goes to Burning Man. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those two things that's what I send to people.
Right.
Yeah. So please.
So, and I was getting all of this, communication from around the world about Burning Man and my role at Burning Man. And we started a Facebook group, Episcopalians at Burning Man, where me and my wife, who's a priest, and another priest, and several other people who have been going to Burning Man a lot, who were Episcopalians, we planned a service at the temple. So that was our next added thing, was coming together as Episcopalians and doing a service at the temple and forming this Episcopal community that was going to be going to Burning Man, but not centered around a camp, because everyone that joined this Facebook group all had their own camps.
How many people were in the group?
I'm thinking like 15 or 20, maybe 15 people in the group.
Okay. Coming from various parts of the world, I imagine.
Yeah, from various parts of the U.S.
Yeah, okay.
We're all in the U.S. So that planning for an explicit sort of Christian service at Burning Man, and my wife was going to come along this time, and I got invited to do a TED Talk at the TEDx event at Burning Man. So those were the three new features, in addition to needing to up my costume game.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you prepare differently, like as far as survival tips for the second year?
The second year I built a hexayurt. So I moved out of the tent that I kept forgetting to close and moved into a hexayurt. That was my big change, was doing that, and got cots instead of sleeping on the ground.
Yeah.
So I did some personal comfort things, but didn't create a swamp cooler or any cooling thing. I just got the yurt.
So. Yeah. So we get there, and then that's the year that I met you.
Right.
And we're at Perky Parts again. the camp was bigger this year, right?
Well, we merged with another camp.
Yeah, Playground.
Yes, we merged with Playground. And because I had my wife there, and I didn't engage nearly as much with the Perky Parts people as the first year, because the first year I was there alone with them, and they were my whole family. This time I had Andrea there, and a lot of my time was spent either preparing for the TED Talk or being, tending Andrea and making sure she was having a good time. So I didn't have the long lingery time with the Perky Parts people, and I missed that. That second time.
What new experiences did you have your second year that you weren't expecting?
I knew it was coming, but I wasn't expecting the power of the temple burn. I knew it was going to be significant, but it was more than I imagined. The two added things were being there for the burning of the man, and the burning of the man was interesting, and it was sort of what I expected. It's the big party, but it was the power of the burning of the temple was my new big takeaway from that second year.
Well, can you describe what you mean by that, by the power? Were you, the feeling that you had, was it maybe similar or connected to the feeling that you were describing about your first sort of spiritual awakening? Did it feel like it was a part of that family? Or was it powerful from a stance of watching a community at work?
For me, it was the communality of the event. And I've been on lots of meditation retreats. I've been on a lot of, I do things, sort of individual spiritual things, right? But being a part of, I'm guessing, 40, 50,000 people at that point, or some large number, being silent. And that was we're in a culture where we're not silent. And starting 30 minutes before the burn, it was just quiet and hushed tones. And then I left after 30 minutes, and I was of it burning after, and I was one of the first people to leave. And it was completely silent. And that the power of this shared silence, and except for the sobs, that was the part that just blew me away. And there's people, who've been on the party bus for 5 days or whatever, or now just holding each other in this silence and caring for each other. It was breathtaking.
Just even on that note of the party bus thing again, it's, I want to say, I could be misremembering this. I'm like tracing back to my world religions class at Mesa College, but I want to say our professor was describing the way that the Buddha saw the world. He's like, you know what? Yeah, go get the partying out of your system. And each week, like that week of Burning Man feels like a lifetime.
Right.
And I almost feel like that's what I've experienced the first couple of years. And like now I'm sort of got the hang of it. I know where I'm at. But it's interesting to watch people go through the experience of, all right, get the partying out of your system. Sure, go party. Go to the orgy dome. Go do all the drugs. Go do whatever. And then by the end of the week, once you've released all of that physical energy, now you're ready to really sit down and listen and be silent for a minute. And it is a powerful experience.
Well, and I learned even sort of on a more micro daily thing, that first year when I was going around blessing people, I learned like it matters what time of day. Like at night when people are on the party bus or they're getting ready, they're not open for that.
Right.
The next morning when I would go out at sunrise, people were really open and would embrace me but it felt almost like an intrusion. I'm trying to push something sacred on you when you're getting dressed for the party. Just felt weird. Well, as the next morning, after they got that partying out of their system and they're watching the sunrise, there was this openness for it. That was sort of a daily cycle that was then repeated with the whole week.
Yeah, there is I can just tell you as a person who's partaken in lots of psychedelics, it does, even that psychedelic experience feels like a lifetime. It usually starts out with this almost like excited energy, and then you kind of, when you hit the peak of the experience, you're feeling sort of at your strongest. Maybe if you compare it to a lifetime, it feels like you've just turned 30. And then by the end of the trip, that's usually when you feel more somber, you feel a little more calm, you've expended your energy. It feels like you're more open to conversation. A lot of people that I talk to, like usually at the end of a trip, like that's the perfect time to sit down and really talk. Like and it feels like a lifetime. This 8-hour experience feels like you went from being a teenager to being an adult to being an older person with wisdom. And I imagine that's a part of the experience that you were tuning into by seeing people at sunrise because they've been out all night doing all their other stuff. Right. Did you meet with the Facebook group that you were describing? The Episcopal gathering?
Just to do, at that second Burning Man, we had a planning meeting. We had done some planning beforehand to bring the materials we needed, and then we had a short planning meeting at Perky Parts where we assigned who's going to do what. So we just met once for a planning meeting, and then the next day we did our service at the temple.
Tell me about the service.
It was spectacular, and I didn't know if it was going to feel awkward. Like doing a service in a mall or something. I just didn't know like if it was going to feel awkward, and it felt totally organic. And we started the service with about 15 people, and it kept growing. The time we were there, it kept growing, and one woman came out of the temple and came up to us and said, "I just put my son's ashes in the temple." And I just put my teenage son's ashes in the temple. I'm worried about my other son, whether or not he's going to make it. Can I have communion?
Wow.
And, people who were just in this heart open place and it kept growing. And then when the service was over, we couldn't leave because people kept coming. And it was like if anyone had any frame of reference where this chalice and this bread means something to you, even if it was when you were 5 or whatever, they came over and they wanted to receive communion or they wanted to be prayed for. And 5 people independently, like 5 different people came up to us during that time and said, "Are you going to do this tomorrow? Or are you going to do this every day?" Like, never in my priestly life have I finished a church service and have someone come up to me so excited saying, "Are you going to do this again?" And even myself, this last week when I was celebrating, there was something that was much more open. Here I do 3 or 4 services on a Sunday, and it's a lot of work.
Right.
And it's work.
Yeah.
I'm at work.
Mm-hmm.
At Burning Man, when I was celebrating, I wasn't at work, and there was something really it was just really like opening and grounding, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful, beautiful service.
How long did it last?
I'm thinking 35 minutes.
Okay.
35.
Minutes. Did it start with you like with someone making an announcement, or did you just start doing it and trust that people knew what was going on?
Well, we didn't want to be intrusive of the temple, right? We didn't shout, "We're doing a service now," right? So the 15 of us gathered around the beautiful table with the chalice and the paten and the bread and the wine. And, I said to the people gathered, "Welcome, I'm glad you're here." And then we just started, and people walking by would see something happening and show up. And that was, and so it just sort of grew organically and very sort of respectfully and softly from there.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you do it again the next day?
No, and we didn't have it planned, and we were all, anyway, we didn't.
Yeah.
And that's when we decided to get more organized for this year, and we were going to do a lot more, and then the key people didn't get tickets at the main sale.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then everything, so we just stopped talking about it, because I was, of the key leaders, I was the only one that had a ticket.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before, that people started getting tickets. And so we did a call a week before and said, "Let's do 2 Eucharists." And we did 2 instead of 1.
What's a Eucharist? I'm sorry.
It's a communion service.
Okay.
Sorry.
Would it be too crazy to think about the possibility of starting your own camp?
No, I wanted to start a camp. So I came up, and the other thing that happened last year was when I was a hyper for the Purple for Prince party at Perky Parts.
Yeah.
I was wearing a purple cassock, which is a floor-length, tight, close-fitting robe that looks very priestly.
I remember this.
It's sort of like Neo, the black, it's normally in black, but I had a purple cassock. And I was hyping, and in the 45 minutes I was hyping, 7 people came by and stopped and said, "You're the priest."
Yeah.
And wanted a blessing or, wanted to connect. And that combined with that, the people wanting more of that Eucharist, I started to think if we had a camp where people knew where they could go to get get prayed for, to get a blessing, that kind of thing. So I hatched the idea of a camp. A woman from my church who was at Burning Man, Carice, she came up with the idea of calling it religious as fuck. She made this beautiful religious as fuck banner sign. And because people didn't get their tickets and because they all had their own camps, this year I created a camp of one. So I had my own camp, and I didn't log it into the system, but I created this religious as fuck sign with a little sign that said, "May I bless you," just to get the bones in place to do a camp. And people stopped because of the sign and wanted to talk about it or wanted to be blessed. So I want to start a camp.
Yeah.
And we'll see if I can get critical mass of other people that want to join a religious as fuck camp. And if you're listening to this, please contact me if you want to be a part of a Christian camp.
That would be absolutely amazing. It really is the place that so much of Burning Man is what Burning Man is holding for you in your church. You're basically approaching it with the same thing going to Burning Man. It's another meeting room.
Right.
It's another place to build connections that you're building. And what an amazing experience. I mean, I'm getting choked up just even thinking about it. What an amazing experience this must be for someone who grew up in the church, perhaps with their family, and has all these comfortable connections to it, however, is not happy with where our country has gone as far as what's been labeled religious conservatism, and it's not. It's bullshit.
Right.
But what's been labeled as that, and so now they feel like they don't have a place to go anymore, and they could stumble across religious as fuck at Burning Man and find, holy shit, I can have this and that.
Right.
The peaceful, beautiful place from my upbringing that I don't feel like I belong to anymore, but now I can find it here.
Right. I
mean, that absolutely must be the most amazing. I'm so happy for those people once you make this camp happen.
Right. Yeah, and I'm the other piece of this is I'm getting close to the time where I can retire from my job of leading churches. And I'm trying to figure out what my next vocation is. And, I love leading churches, but there's also, a lot of work involved in it. And if I could, I'm trying to figure out what, and this whole thing about going to Burning Man and preaching this sermon and it going viral, and I feel called to do something, to be somehow a priest at Burning Man and to this wider world in a way that's completely different than, and in 4 years I'll have the flexibility to do that, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. If I could do anything I wanted with my background and my gifts, what would that be? And Burning Man is calling me to into that. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
As far as what's happening in our country as a whole,
yes,
I imagine it has made your job a little more difficult.
No. It's made my job a lot more interesting, and it's made my job a lot more important. And I'm feeling it's less vague. Now we can see the places that are fucked. Can see places that are fucked up, that were fucked up before. They just they weren't in our consciousness.
Yeah.
And if my job is to be part of a community that says, let's go to the fucked up places and make them better, but the fucked upness is all under the surface, right? Yeah. Now, it's what I've been telling my congregation is, social justice can no longer be a hobby, right? It has to be my vocation. It has to be what we're about. It can't be, we show up at this rally or that rally because it makes us feel good. Mm-hmm. There's stuff happening here that we have to get involved in, and all hands on deck. And we're addressing racism in ways that we weren't addressing it, and I wasn't addressing it 2 or 3 years ago. And just white supremacy, white privilege. We're having conversations that we weren't having 5 years ago. Yeah. So that part of it is fascinating, and that's the other part. It's like I have these two worlds. One is the Burning Man world. The other is the social justice world. And how do I address the poverty and homelessness and racism and all of those broken things in a way that's more powerful and more intentional than I've been doing in the past?
Right. I see a simile to sort of like what your guys, I wonder if this is something that you're experiencing, where I have like so many Muslim friends that very progressive families, and they're doing their own thing, and they're like, well, why do we have to answer for the crazy extremist fuckheads on the other side of the planet? And there is a frustration that exists within like the Muslim community, and that like I shouldn't have to even be asked, like, what do I think of XYZ? Because I get that as an Iranian American. I get people ask, what do you think about what's going on over there in Iran? I'm like, well, which part?
Right.
It's a pretty vague question.
Right.
But, I'm only basing this totally anecdotally on many conversations that I've had with people who, again, have my more lefty, crazy, hippie artist friends that see Christianity as one big brushstroke.
Right.
And I imagine part of the challenge for you is a PR one. How do you communicate to the masses outside of your church that painting all of Christianity with the same broad brush is not helping anybody?
Right. Well, and I feel like we're coming to, and it might just be my own personal experience, but we're kind of coming to the tail end of that.
Yeah.
Whereas, coming up in the 90s as a priest, where the religious right was so powerful, my whole, the first 20 years of my ministry was basically saying, but we're not like that. Right.
Yeah.
Which really isn't, and our message was, we don't suck as much as other churches, rather than this is going to transform you. We're just doing damage control about we're not like that. But I think there are things that are shifting. The religious right is losing some of its dominance, and it's being the only voice. And I'm doing more and more things like speaking in yoga studios and doing the Burning Man thing. And right now churches are stepping up, like I said earlier about the civil rights. It's like the civil rights movement again, where significant leadership in the anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, are coming from the churches, and the churches are speaking up. So people are finally seeing the church as part of the solution rather than the problem. So I feel like we're kind of at the tail end of a really horrible long season.
Yeah.
Of that.
That's some optimistic news.
And I also think that there are people, shortly after we got here, we had someone in the congregation who was this marketing kind of person, and we did two focus groups to find out what people thought about the church. And people 45 and older thought the church was the source of all evil. Huh. Like the baby boomers thought the church was the source of all evil. Yeah. The younger people were like, what's church?
Yeah.
They didn't have a negative or positive valence for it. They just didn't know it. And if they did have a valence, it was more positive because their grandmother took them to church once. Right. And if they went to church, they wanted to look like church and smell like church. And now there are people that are wanting more ritual, more traditional, more grounded. So there's and the Episcopal Church has been retaining ritual. While the big box churches have been bringing in the rock bands, right? We've been keeping this fire burning, and finally people are coming back to this fire. They're like, we want ritual. We want something ancient and traditional. So I think we're coming out of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think initially when there's like a hodgepodge of spirituality that we're kind of watching happen, I think, a lot with younger generations, where you're seeing people that are kind of picking from many different spiritual practices,
right.
Which is like an interesting thing that I feel like it, to some extent probably exists because of the internet, because we have access to various kinds of information. So, a lot of the people that I interact with will have like a little bit of Buddhism, a little bit of Hinduism, a little bit of Christianity, and that's their personal spiritual practice.
Right.
What is your thought on that?
Well, I think it's a good thing, and I think it's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good, like, I've done a lot of work with Tibetan Buddhists, and my own Christian spiritual practice is richer because of my, the meditating I've done with Tibetan Buddhists. So there's that piece of it. The downside of it, I think, is that, the big thing we're battling against as humans is our own egos. Mm-hmm. And if you create your own religious world out of practices, that it's so easy for that to be driven by your ego, by what appeals to you,
right,
without being a part of a tradition that pisses you off or forces you to do something you like. You can create a religious world with no grist in the mill that pushes you into being better than you, right? Like, there's something about being a tradition that says you need to do this.
Yes. Because part of the experience is, I can relate this with artists. I've mentored a few different people on starting their own podcasts. And what I tell them is, you set that fucking deadline. Come hell or high water, you are meeting that deadline. And what that does is it forces you to sometimes make sacrifices. Maybe you're not terribly happy with like some part of the interview or whatever, but you're going to meet that deadline. And that's where the growth comes in, right? Where you stick to a certain ritual. And I feel like that's what you're describing, is that's the value that comes out of sticking to a ritual that existed before you. So you can't just wake up tomorrow and say, yeah, fuck it, I don't feel like doing that.
Right. And the Bible, the Bible, I think, is a great example. Because there's stuff in there that really pisses me off.
Yeah.
Until it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? That I would reject. Like the story of Adam and Eve, I rejected for so long, and then finally I read it one day and I was like, holy fuck. Yeah. That's the smartest thing I've ever seen. Like, the spiritual wisdom in that little thing is so brilliant, but I never would have seen it because, so to be part of a tradition where I assume that people that created the ritual and created these scriptures are spiritually smarter than me. And I'm going to give myself over to this ritual, hoping that I can learn from their spiritual wisdom.
Right. There's a little bit of truth in everything. Yeah, and I've seen. It's funny though. I've definitely met. There's no shortage of lefty hippie crystal healer types that I've met that I'm like, you're basically a Bible thumper. Like you're basically exactly that thing that we have the negative connotation with.
Right.
The judgmental, like, this is the way it has to be, and it's very deeply connected to your ego, and it's. I feel kind of bad for them because, like, some part of them is looking for this thing. But, man, the ego is a powerful thing. You create enough of that, you'll become a slave to it.
Right. And I need the tradition. Mm-hmm. There are other people that might be far enough along that they can do without it. But I'm not that advanced.
Yeah.
So
radical ritual.
Right.
Yeah. So, plans for next year. You want a camp.
I want a camp.
That's what's in the works.
Yeah, I'm hoping that, if I just keep this conversation going, that there'll be enough people that, there are people that are interested, but they're connected with their own camps.
Yeah. It would involve them leaving that to join this thing. That's a tough one.
And I really miss my, if I don't have my own camp, I'm hoping to be back with Perky Parts.
Yeah. Because do a village.
I love them.
Yeah, I think a village with Perky Parts would be great. I mean, I want to get a burner podcast camp going, so maybe the three of our crews can get together.
So maybe I'll be a camp of 1 or a camp of 5 as part of the Perky Parts Village. Yeah. Would be fine with me.
Now that it's been 3 years of attending the burn, is there anything you can connect to changes in how you're operating in your day-to-day life? Or is it just further affirming those same lessons you got from the first one?
Well, the second one, when I experienced the man burn and the temple burn, was really just a deepening and a big sort of this broadening of my love for Burning Man and the profundity of the experience there. This last one was weird for me because I didn't have a camp. My wife nor my daughter could attend. So I was alone and I wasn't prepared for the heat. Yeah. I didn't have a cooling thing. Yeah. And it was, for me, this Burning Man was the hard Burning Man.
Interesting.
Where I came up to that edge of just being miserable and not having my people. Yeah. And so that was this was a completely different experience, and it's the kind of thing that will take months, as I pray about it and think about it, where what this Burning Man, what this retreat experience meant to me, wasn't as simple and obvious as the temple burn, was the year before. Yeah.
But it is the burn you needed to have.
Right. And
that's part of the ritual.
And the gentleman dying on, that there's just facets to this one that's just, it's different. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we did the Eucharist, and it was beautiful, it was glorious. I made some great friendships, some accidental friends, and it was hard, and so we'll see. Yeah, but I'm committed.
Yeah, you've got some processing time to do.
Yeah,
and I hope to sit down with you again after you've had some of that, so we can discuss it.
Cool.
Because right now it's been like a day.
Yes, yeah, and I am speaking from exhaustion.
Yeah, no, me too. I've been sleeping insane amounts of hours, but man, it is beautiful up here. It's worked out perfectly that I ended up coming to Sacramento after the burn instead of going straight back to San Diego and being able to sit down with you. This has been wonderful, and on behalf of the community as a whole, I want to thank you for everything that you're doing and everything you're doing, not just for your own congregation here, but for Burning Man as a whole and for society as a whole. And if we can populate the earth with more of you, we'll be on a better earth.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
All right, well, there's Brian Baker. I absolutely loved recording this interview. I had a beautiful exodus from the burn and got to swing by Sacramento to see him. So I loved it. I'm super happy that I got this one in the can. Please give us a like on Facebook and join the group. I'd love to see some more discussions and shit happening in there. I'm already seeing some posting and stuff, so that's exciting. People sharing their events. I want you to do that. Post shit in the group. And leave us a review on iTunes. It really does help get the show more visible. The more you guys leave reviews, I don't even care if they're shit reviews, just leave a review, please. All the links to all that stuff is over at burnerpodcast.com. You can connect with me on all the social medias at Mr. Arash. That's MRARASH. Facebook is where I'm most active. You can add me or follow me, whatever you want to do, like random shit. And on Instagram, of course, you can tweet me and stuff as well, but Facebook is sort of where I am most often. You can also kind of follow me on Snapchat. Snapchat. I've already forgotten. Snapchat is sort of like my video diary. You see a little glimpse into my day-to-day life, but I'm not as active on there. So Facebook is the big one. Burner Podcast is released on the first and third Wednesdays of the month and is available on Stitcher, iTunes, Spreaker, iHeart Radio, and TuneIn Radio, among many others. This show is not hard to find. The Burner Podcast team includes, but is not limited to, associate producer Tori Massey, network music editor Navjeet Sarna. There's all these people that have worked on the show to get it to where it is today. We thank all of them. We thank you, dear listeners, for all of your support. Our opening music is America's Horse with No Name remix. Horse. I said hose. America's Hose with No Name remix is produced by Joe Man. Check out his music over at soundcloud.com/DJ Joeman. That's it. So until next time, love and light and all that other crap. Good night.